Welcome to some of the track sessions here in the afternoon. My name is John Hagar, and I do a little bit of consulting, a little bit of teaching. I'm out of a company that's just basically myself and my wife called Grand Software Testing. And I want to talk to you about soft skills that you need, but may not have been taught in classes and things like that. We heard the minister talk this morning about needing skills to do testing and the importance of skills. I want to talk to you about that a little bit. This is kind of a double track session, and yeah, we're in a big room, but we'll keep that going. Can everybody hear me okay right at the moment? I have a pretty loud voice, and so I may move around, but my voice does carry pretty well, and if I start not being able to be picked up, just let me know. And we see here a cartoon character out of the U.S. I think that's Linus is his name, and he's working building a house out of cards, which takes a certain level of skill and practice. We're going to talk about some soft skills like that. Certainly, some of you probably have some testing skills. How many of you have taken like a class in testing, maybe in college, or taken the ISTQB exam? Show of hands. Few of you. Okay, that's good. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between skill and knowledge. In college, and most of us went to college, we get knowledge, certain level of skill, but to be a good tester, it takes practice. And in the session I did yesterday, I talked a little bit about that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it here and try and have it so that you understand the difference between knowledge and skill, and that most of us have spent years practicing. I've been practicing software and software testing for about 35 years, but I still learn, I still practice. I was in Dr. Nishi's session yesterday where he was talking about viewpoint and some modeling things. I've been learning modeling and testing for a lot of years, but I still learned something new yesterday, and thank you very much for that. So here I am, an expert, and up talking in front of you, but telling you I'm also still learning. So and developing my skills. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And when you have bugs, when you have something you need testing, I really do believe you need knowledge and skilled testers. And so I want to talk to you about that today. And we've got a few little exercises. Since we've got a double session here, got a little bit extra time to fool around with some things, and maybe even a fun exercise. Do I have any magicians in the room? Anybody that does magic? Good, because we're gonna do some magic. But my skill as a magician is only at the novice level. But I probably got more skill as a magician than most of you, which puts me in safe ground. But occasionally I've had people that were like real magicians in a class, and then I was like, oh, I'm kind of nervous because they probably know more about things than I do. So I want to talk a little bit about something called the schools of testing. Some people like the idea of these schools, some people don't. There's differing viewpoints, maybe be a better way to call it, or sometimes we think of them like different philosophies in testing. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that and what maybe the differences are from both a learning and a practice standpoint. And we'll spend a little time on that. And that's actually not all that unusual. If you think like the field of music or the field of art painting, there's different impressionist or realist styles. In music, there's jazz and classic and rock and roll. But they're all music, right? They're all art. They share some things in common, but the results can be a little bit different, and sometimes even the skills can be a little bit different. So it's not surprising maybe that this is one of the things we have to acknowledge in the practice of software testing, that there's some differing viewpoints on that. Want to talk about knowledge versus skill and how we make that transition. As I said, I've been working to move my knowledge to skill all my career and practicing testing. I'm also always trying to pick up new knowledge and work on that skill too. I've got a sampling of skill lists. There's no shortage of those out on the internet. We'll look at some of them. Some of them are really interesting. Some of them are even kind of funny. We'll talk a couple things about maybe how we practice skills and using an analogy there, and maybe this fun-looking thing sitting up here in front of me will help us on that. And that'll lead into some what I like to call soft skills that, in my experience, both as a tester and then a test manager, if testers have some of these skills, if they work on some of these things, it makes them better teammates, better testers. And you may not have learned these things in school, or they may have mentioned them, but I really find them useful, so I want to talk about those in a little bit of detail in the road of becoming a better tester. That's really what your companies and your organizations want. We want better testers, and certainly as a career goal, being a better tester is a good thing to do. I've had a few people come up to me at this and other conferences and they go, gee, is becoming a tester a good thing? Is it a good career move? Or should I stay being a programmer or move to programming or something like that? Well, I've done programming. I've done systems engineering and a little bit of business analyst kinds of things. I've always gravitated back to software testing. I think it may suit my personality. I'm a little quirky in my personality. You'll see that maybe during the hour or so that we're here. And not everybody's well suited to being a tester, but it is a good career move. I believe that. I think a lot of us that are in the testing field have been here for a lot of years. If you develop these skills and develop the knowledge and practice the testing activities, I haven't had any problem finding jobs. In fact, I'm now at a point in my career where I actually get to turn work down. And that's a nice position to be in, to have people wanting you to do work, and I just don't need to do that work anymore. Usually we're like looking for work, and I'm like, no, I don't need to do that. I've got a nice, comfortable life, and so that's a nice place to be. Maybe you want to get there, and we'll talk maybe how to help in that. And then summary. I do want to note these are my opinions. I'll try and voice when it's somebody else's opinion and information. There's a tendency when you're starting and coming to conferences to think that people like myself and Rob Sabb and Nishi, when we get up and talk, like we know everything. We don't. We're still learning too, and so it's appropriate for me to say you might have a differing opinion, and that's okay. And so I actually have interesting discussions with people that do have differing opinions. So if you got a question, speak up. I realize it's kind of hard in this room to speak up, but I think there's some microphones that might be on, and even if you're quiet, I'll come over and then broadcast to the rest of the room the question or the thought, because we got some time on some of these things. So the first thing here, these schools of testing. Now, some friends of mine, at least they used to be friends, Kem Kaner, James Bach, Brett Petricourt, a while back, a number of years back, and it was really Brett wrote some things where he said, and he coined the phrase school. He said, there's these differing views on how to do testing out there. And he put some names to them. I've changed the names a little bit because I think some of the names he put weren't all that flattering, and other names were maybe a little more descriptive of some of these things. And I list 4 or 5 of these schools up there that are identified. When we talked to Brett and others about it, we said, well, what makes a school? What are some of the distinguishing characteristics? Well, one of the things that we came up with is they definitely have a philosophical viewpoint on a certain aspect of testing that you can put your finger on and say that's a little bit different than one of these other groups. Another distinguishing factor is most of these schools, once they get established and kind of recognized, is they'll have conferences like this conference. And the conference will focus on that philosophy, and people will come and talk at that conference that kind of are supportive of that group. And that's good. But there's a problem with it too that I've found, in that people that subscribe to that particular philosophy or that particular school, they tend to kind of group together. It's I don't know if it's in Malaysian, but there's an English saying, birds of a feather tend to flock together. So the people that believe in a certain way of testing all kind of gather and reinforce each other, and that can be a good thing because you got a lot of friends. The bad side is it can be hard to see that there's other values in some of the other philosophies. So a few of us actually go around to different conferences and some of the different schools and talk and do things and sometimes publish things that one of the schools finds objectionable. I certainly now fit in that group. There's several things that I've done in the last few years that one of the schools takes great issue with. I won't go into what those are, but they will take issue with some of the things I've done. But I feel that somebody that goes around to the different schools is sort of like bees, cross-pollinating flowers and things like that. Turns out to be a good thing. So a few of us go around to numerous conferences and groups and do things that sometimes ruffles the other feathers of the flock members of these schools. So one of the schools that put the name out there decided to call themselves the context-driven school of testing. The description there is they say there's no best practice in testing. There's only good ideas inside of the context of the effort or the project you're trying to do. So you have to know things like budget and schedule and life cycle and the product that you're testing. Those kinds of things affect things like test plan, test strategies, test design, and the tests themselves. And so they're very picky about, there's no best. They tend to favor being a very highly skilled, highly diversified set of testers. And they also tend not to like the whole idea of, say, certifications, say like ISTQB. They're very concerned about the value of a certification. And they're a little bit concerned about process standards, say like we get from IEEE and ISO and OMG. And so they have a skepticism about those things that I'll kind of talk about as I go through this. So that's the first one group up there, the context-driven school. And by the way, they have their own conference. I think it just happened a few weeks ago, or yeah, I guess it was just a few weeks ago. And they're very interesting, very different kinds of conferences there. They tend to like to discuss things. In fact, in a session like we're doing now, I'd be given an hour, and then there'd be a half hour of what they call open season. And everybody gets to stand around and discuss and argue and debate on something I might say. And it's kind of interesting. It's not for everybody because a lot of people don't like to debate things, but that group does. The next school they kind of identified was the process-driven. Now, Brett put the word factory school. I really didn't like that term factory for a variety of reasons because I think it was a little too negative. I've changed it to the process-driven school. And that's where we emphasize knowledge, standards, and maybe some procedures with documents, which this conference I would classify probably closely related to the process school. Very supportive in MSTB of things like the ISTQB. We had the session this morning on that. We have people like myself and other members of the ISO committee that are here that have been working on International Standards Organization 29119, which is the software test standard that came out a couple of years ago. And other standards. I'm on IEEE standards, I'm on modeling standards, the OMG, which produces modeling standards, something called the UML Testing Profile 2.0, I work on that. And the people that support this area like the idea of having frameworks in the form of standards as a good starting point. And frameworks in things like ISTQB syllabus that provides a basic starting point, my word now, for knowledge. And it's good for testers to get that knowledge in common terminology. The context people would argue with me on that, by the way. They would say, no, we don't think so. I won't go into all the arguments. They're very long and a little theoretical sometimes. I believe that both schools, those particular schools, have a lot of value, by the way. In fact, I think all these schools have some value. The next school that gets identified is the quality assurance process, which is very closely related to the process group. But the quality assurance folks, and they have their own conference and their own association, they recognize testing and testing process, but they expand things a little bit into the quality assurance side that says a big part of how we get good software is by having a fairly rigorous software development process. The hallmark of these folks, you may have heard of the CMMI, Capabilities Maturity Model Integrated, and some of those maturity model kinds of things. That's their view of the world on how we get I'll say good software, and there's some validity there too. I've been through numerous CMMI audits, actually going back to before it was the CMMI, when it was just the CMM, and the founder of that whole movement, Watts Humphrey, is somebody that I've actually worked with. He was a very interesting gentleman. But even Watts, and some of us in the process schools, never would have subscribed to what the context folks accuse us of saying you have to follow these processes dogmatically and never deviate from them. And we would always say sometimes you follow the process, maybe sometimes you don't. Maybe some projects you do, maybe some projects you don't. And I've actually, unfortunately, Watts Humphrey died a few years ago, but I had long dinner conversations with Watts on that, and I do believe he would be okay with what I'm saying. The next school, and I don't see Robin or Jasper in the room, but I do have Dr. Nishi here, gets called the academic school. And these are usually college professors, no offense. But the hallmark of this group is they're usually researchers. They're usually in colleges or universities. They're usually members of ACM and IEEE kinds of organizations, which are related to the process and quality schools also. But they, in their conferences and papers, emphasize things like peer-reviewed papers and peer-reviewed journals. They're very rigorous on that. They're very I'll say academic in terms of the kinds of tools and techniques they look at. Sometimes they're interesting, sometimes I have a little bit of a hard time understanding what they're researching. And they usually have graduate students working on master's degrees and PhDs doing this work. And occasionally they'll produce a tool or a technique or a concept that somebody like Dr. Nishi or Robin or myself will go, oh, that's good. Let's take that down into the real world of testing and maybe put it in one of these other schools. So we need the academic side also. because that's where we get some of the, I'll say, original ideas and what we call sometimes pure research and pure science that sometimes is just kind of interesting and sometimes yields really good results, because a lot of the techniques and processes that you all know started out as kind of academic exercises.